Thank you, Dr. Henley. And now I'd like to ask all of our guest presenters to return to the stage. And for all of you who would like to actually just stand while we're standing, if you want to just do a quick stretch, this would be a great time for that before we have our panel discussion. Exactly. I could lead us in some kind of aerobics thing, but I'm not qualified really. So, but a good stretch is good as we get ready for our panel discussion. So I guess I'll sit, I'll sit here. Perfect. So again, our experts are happy to answer any questions that you may have, but again, they're unable to answer anything that is related specifically for, to medical advice that you might have for your own situation. And if you have a question, if you could please put your hand up, and then I believe we have someone roving with a mic. We do. And we also have a mic up here at the front. Do we have a roving mic, Sandra? Oh, hello. Oh, there goes the roving mic on that way. We also have the mic up front. And virtual participants, I haven't forgotten about you. Karen, who is here in the audience too, she is actually there monitoring this right now, and they will relay your questions to me as well. So let us begin, and let us find out more from our experts here while they are with us. Let's glean more information. Do we have our first? Maybe we'll take it from here in the house. Okay.
All so much for your presentations. They were all great. I have a question for Dr. Ward. I was wondering, so you mentioned a couple times polyphenols and how they're associated with benefits for bone health. Could you expand a bit more on what you mean by bone health? Are you talking about density, microarchitecture?
Sure. Thanks for that question. And I just wanted to put that in because, we have that half plate, we're reading fruits and vegetables. And so there's a lot of polyphenols naturally in those plant-based foods. And that's an area that we're looking at in our research labs. So it's very much exploratory at this point. But what we're seeing and a lot of it's using animal models as well, so preclinical models, is we're seeing favorable effects of increasing the intake of the polyphenols in those animals and seeing better bone strength, higher bone mineral density, and better quality bone structurally as well. So we don't know about all the mechanisms. There's a lot of cell studies that are out there, but they're isolated cell studies, so it's just looking at osteoblasts or the bone building cells or the bone breakdown cells, the osteoclasts. And there's some ideas that there can be some antioxidant properties happening. So with aging, you can get that accumulation of the oxidant stress. Does that help? Thank you.
And we'll go on this side of the floor. And Karen, do you have one too? Okay, and we'll head to the virtual audience after this one.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your presentations. This is a question for Dr. Ward. On one of your slides, coffee drinking caused an excretion of calcium. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, so caffeine can causes us to excrete more calcium in our urine. It's not a huge amount of calcium that we lose in the urine. So it's all about balance. So as long as our caffeine intake isn't too high and we're getting the recommended amount of calcium, the two counter each other, and that's okay. I had put it up because it often becomes a question people hear about caffeine, because caffeine has that effect that it makes us pee more, essentially, a bit of a diuretic effect. And so that's the concern. So it's okay as long as we're within the limits of caffeine intake and that we're getting enough calcium in our diet.
Dr. Ward, what about decaf?
So you wouldn't have the caffeine effects there. So
It doesn't even have any caffeine in it then? Because I'd heard that maybe it did, or?
it probably has a minuscule amount.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Not
And
terrific.
I think, just to expand on that, there's lots of teas that don't have caffeine as well. So if you are kind of curious about still having a hot drink or some sort of tea, you can do a herbal and not have the caffeine in that.
Karen, how about someone from the virtual world?
Yes, I have a question for Dr. Lee Gable. A few people wondered about activities such as swimming and spin class, riding a bike. How does that affect bone building?
Right, those are great questions. So as I'm sure you can imagine, thinking about bone being squished, swimming, you're floating, so you don't get that type of bone squishing. Cycling as well, you're not weight bearing. So neither of those activities are particularly bone building. However, they're great for a whole lot of other reasons. So I think they can become a healthy complement to your overall sort of activity profile. I grew up as a swimmer. Maybe I would have included more other activities, aside from swimming. So I think cross training is probably important in order to get kind of a healthy mix. But as I and Brent alluded to, you don't need a whole ton of high-impact bone-building activities to get the benefit. So I wouldn't discourage anyone from participating in activities and movement that they like.
And from the house, maybe right at the far back there, do we have, here comes the microphone. Osteoporosis and scoliosis.
That's a tough question for me to answer. It's hard for us actually to use our bone density machine or bone density assessment on a scoliotic spine. But to the extent that scoliosis develops from a muscle imbalance with neuromuscular imbalance causing the change in position of the spine, it probably also means that the bone is not getting the same normal stimulus for growth. And so I would suspect that it may be associated with some relative bone loss. Maybe other members of the panel have thoughts on that. Sorry, that's the best I could do.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley, and thank you for your question. And now to the question back in the mic there. You've got the mic? Oh, yes, you do. Okay.
I have the mic. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you very much for all of you. This is really informative. My question is for Dr. Ward. It has to do with what I was told a number of times by some of my medical professionals, that when I take my vitamin D and my calcium supplements, they should be taken together to improve absorption, and that taking them in the latter part of the day, early evening, is even better because the body is in kind of a slow down motion and you would absorb more as well.
So vitamin D is sort of calcium's helper. That's how I think of it, that it helps us use our calcium better. And it helps us to absorb in our guts the calcium that's there as well. And I know with calcium, and I know Dr. Hanley knows a lot about calcium supplements. I know with calcium supplements, it depends on the form. So if you're having calcium carbonate supplements, it's better to have those with a meal when you've got the digestive juices happening to help with the absorption, because that form is just not as well absorbed unless you have it with a meal and have the gastric juice and the change in pH. Vitamin D can help with that absorption as well. There's other forms of calcium supplements like calcium citrate, which I know you can take anytime and without a meal and get fairly good absorption. I think one of the things about taking calcium and vitamin D together is that you're remembering to take the vitamin D as well. Like I've had a lot of people say to me, well, I forget. So I say, well, have it with a meal because you tend to remember what should be around your plate. I don't know, Dr. Hanley, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think the point about remembering to take medicines or supplements, whatever helps you remember is what you should follow. But really, there's no particular reason why you should take vitamin D supplements with the calcium. Vitamin D has to be converted to a more active form in order to stimulate bone or calcium absorption from the diet. So it really doesn't matter what time of day you take the vitamin D supplement.
Okay, yes, right here.
Thank you all very much for your contributions today. I've learned a lot, and this is a quick tie-in with another vitamin D question for Dr. Ward, I guess. I'm wondering if there is an upper load of, or an upper limit to vitamin D. We have heard sometimes about vitamin supplements. There can be too much of a good thing. So I'm just wondering if there is an upper limit rather, and would it affect the calcium absorption negatively in any way? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really nice question. There are what we call upper tolerable levels, or ULs, for all our nutrients. So just like we were talking about recommended levels, there are these upper limits that we shouldn't go beyond. And vitamin D has one as well, because we know at that point we're not getting any additional benefit for health outcomes. And in fact, we're getting into potential harms. So that's the transition that's happening there. And because I'm under pressure, I'm drawing a bit of a blank, but I think the number is 4,000 international units as the upper limit for vitamin D. But in saying that, I'm certainly not advocating that people be taking 4,000 IUs per day. That's just been determined as the upper tolerable level for intake. And certainly, our current guidelines now and in the newly released guidelines that Dr. Hanley was referring to, were the thought is to have as much vitamin D rich foods in your diet as you can. And then when you're over age 50, and those new guidelines are for individuals 50 years and older, is following Health Canada's guidance that anyone over the age of 50 should be taking 400 IUs of vitamin D per day, which is far, much lower than that upper tolerable level. But you make a very good point about supplements, and that you can easily get to levels that could get you in a range where you could be getting negative effects on your health if you're taking too much. So I always say, be careful. Supplements they're in a drug level at that point, or can act like a drug if you're taking enough of it and really jump up your levels. You're certainly never going to overconsume nutrients from food sources, and that's where a lot of that food first approach is coming into play. Thank you.
If I could just add something to that.
Sorry, Dr.
We just completed a clinical trial here in healthy people under the age of 70, but over the age of 55, testing 400 units a day versus 4,000 units a day versus 10,000 units a day. And all of those levels were basically safe, although there was more problems with blood calcium going a little high with the 10,000 unit dose. But what we found was there was no bone benefit. The 400 units a day for normal, healthy adults maintained a normal bone level of vitamin D in the blood. And the people who were on the higher doses, actually, in using Dr. Boyd's very sophisticated method of measuring bone density, they actually lost bone compared to the people who took 400 units a day. Now, we didn't see more fractures or anything. We don't know how significant that is, but there certainly was no benefit. And then I would just echo what Dr. Ward said.
Dr. Edwards, it's safe to say I'm going to ask you a question about this micro trauma that I probably have in my bones right now. And I have a teenage daughter, and I see that there's a lot of stress fractures actually that we are seeing in this teenage age group in the track and field world. And I'd just love to know, is it really just as simple as just don't train as much? Like, how can we, or somebody like myself who maybe has like a stress fracture, is there something you can point to how to prevent that from happening?
If you haven't had one yet, I wouldn't really worry about it.
Okay.
It's the people, because one of the highest risks for having a stress fracture is having already had a stress fracture. And then where you see a lot of stress fractures are in people participating in endurance activity. And that's where energy availability becomes a really big, important issue. And so at that point, it really becomes important to ensure that you're having adequate intake of calories to be able to repair the micro damage, that you're getting. And then the other thing to think about with these, stress fractures is they rarely, if at all, happen without some kind of prodromal pain. You have a hot spot in your shin, you can feel it coming on, but you work through it and you try to work through it. And I guess the best advice I could say is listen to the language of your body. That's probably the best way that you can try to prevent one of these things, because they don't just happen out of the blue. You'll feel them coming on, and so if that does happen,
Pickleball? or
it's
is it-
harder to rest if you're on a track and field team, right?
Right, yes, right. And pickleball, what about pickleball?
I don't know. I could probably dig through the literature and find an incidence of one stress fracture from a pickleball player. But he probably just did way too much pickleball too soon. So
Right.
focus on the pickleball volume, not the pickleball intensity.
Right, which you did stress in your talk. Yes, okay. How about a virtual question? We have just a couple more minutes, actually, but a virtual.
Yes, I have another question for Dr. Brent Edwards here. And somebody is wondering about the current trend to have very high and thick cushion in running shoes. And wouldn't be less squishy be better for osteoporosis?
Right. Okay. We could get into a very nuanced discussion here about where the risk of a stress fracture come from. There's camps that believe it happened when you hit the ground, when your heel hits the ground, and you get this impact that occurs. But I think now what we know a lot more about loading of the skeleton, and what we know is that the primary loading on the skeleton comes from muscle contraction, and it doesn't come from these external impact forces. And so, the latest evidence is suggesting that no, it's not bad to have these cushioned running shoes, and even these heavily cushioned running shoes like Hoka. I think one of the more interesting questions moving forward is actually around these new super shoes that people are wearing, the people that are breaking these world record distances, and those have a lot of cushioning as well. But it's not necessarily the cushioning in that shoe. They have carbon fiber plates that run along the length of these shoes, which makes the shoe bend much less. And if the shoe doesn't bend, then it means that it's hard for you to flex the bones in your foot, which means that the bones in your foot experience more load. And so one of the questions, and this is like early days, but one of the questions is, are we going to see more stress fractures or overuse injuries in people wearing these new super shoes? And I don't think anybody knows the answer to that yet.
From the front here.
Hi. This question is for Dr. Gabel. I'm just wondering about if estrogen is still available for bone building in young women that take contraceptives, especially the ones that reduce menses or eliminate it altogether.
Yeah, and actually that's a really interesting discussion, and it's actually really hard to infer if somebody is regularly menstruating if they're also on oral contraceptives, because that's not a true menstrual bleed. So we can't use a menstrual cycle to gauge menstruation the same way. The contraceptives typically used, oral contraceptives, are a combination of estrogen and progesterone, usually, and so you do get some of that estrogen. Yes, there would be a bit of estrogen there. That what has been shown is with some of these very low dose estrogen pills and contraceptives, that perhaps is not great for bone, because they're not providing estrogen to the same extent that would be provided during a normal cycle with the estrogen produced in the follicles. So oral contraceptives, the safety of them has been widely studied. In general, they're quite safe, but there's an issue potentially with these very low dose estrogen pills not supplying enough estrogen. Thanks.
We have one at the back, I see, or just right here. Okay, and then maybe one at the back, and I think we're in our timeline here, I think. So one here and then one at the back. And maybe if we have time, we'll squeeze in a virtual. Okay.
Okay, good morning, and thank you so much. How informative and, yeah, very exciting information. Thank you so much. Just a couple quick questions. One for Dr. Ward. And I was just wondering, I really enjoy a latte, which has lots of calcium. Just even 1 cup is good enough. But what about a soy latte? I wonder if you could say something on that. And also, what are your thoughts on adding Mediterranean salt and Celtic salt to some of our foods, just to, because it's got all the minerals or more minerals than the calcium and vitamin D. So I wonder if you could address that, please. And also, Dr. Edward, I wonder if you could speak on a boxing program versus a weights program, just if you've got some thoughts on that. Thank you.
So to answer your question about, so in your latte having a soy beverage in there, or however much you want to use in there, that if it's a fortified source of calcium, it will work the same way as cow's milk will, and it provide the calcium, because a lot of the products that are out there, I sometimes go through and check in the stores, the level of fortification is very similar to cow's milk in a lot of those products, but you have to check the product you're using or where your favorite coffee, tea place is. Yeah, that would be fine. Now, about the salt and the minerals, I'm not familiar with that at all. And I know sodium can be, we've got to watch how much sodium we're getting in our Canadian diets. So I'm one of those people actually that doesn't really use salt at all, because I know I'm getting enough and my family's getting enough just with eating out or, processed foods that creep into the diet. So I'm sorry, I can't really answer that part. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for that question. I was going to show a figure with a bunch of athletes, and it was sort of cross-sectional, different types of athletes and how much bone mineral they had, but I knew that Dr. Gable was going to do something similar. But the graph that I was going to show didn't have boxers, it had mixed martial arts athletes, and they have some of the greatest bone mineral density of any athletes. I'm not telling you all to go out and start doing mixed martial arts, but it's probably not the mixed martial arts. It's probably not being in the octagon that gives you the good bone health. It's the cross training and the jump roping and the skipping and the variable loading. And what's also important for bone building is short bursts of impulsive activity, right? Some of the people who have the best bones are people that do Olympic weightlifting. And so what do? They sit down in a chair and they do nothing. For like 15 minutes, they do nothing. And then they get up and they lift like 200 kilograms and they do it very impulsively and quickly. And then they go and they sit back down for like 15 minutes. That's some of the best things that you could do. And gymnastics is kind of like intermittent bouts of them. And so I think when you do boxing and mixed martial arts, there's probably a lot of that, which is good and healthy. Yeah.
One at the back really quick, and then one here. And then I think I'm kind of getting that, Okay. Yes, at the very back. Yes.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interest in that, and I think we don't have a really good answer on that. But having said that, there are populations throughout history that have consumed plant-based diets, and the bone health isn't standing out as a problem. So my advice would be to try and work with a registered dietitian. And I'm sure they can come up with a plan so that you're meeting all the targets that you need to. Because for sure you're going to have to be more strategic in terms of some of those nutrient choices, and that's what you're sharing with me in that question. That would be what I would do is work with a registered dietitian on that. don't think there's anything that's completely transferable for you to work on that diet per se. I think it'd be best to use the clinical resources that are there. Yeah. Yes, and that's, yeah, I like where your thinking's going in terms of, energy and the ratios with other nutrients.
Thank you. And in the red jacket, yes.
Thanks so much. I'm sure I speak for everyone saying that all the presenters were phenomenal. It's such a pleasure to hear the practical sort of side of things and have you take your science and bring it to us in a way that's approachable. So thank you to everyone for that. Dr. Ward, I just wondered, I love seeing, the food first approach highlighted on your slides and the recommendations about cooking skills. And we know that that's something that's really disappearing across our landscape and in our Canadian practices. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on sort of culinary medicine and teaching kitchens and that work, and whether or not that's of value to our populations to try to reinforce some of these concepts you were teaching on today.
I love that idea. And actually, I was just Googling some teaching kitchens that are in the US right now and being incorporated into university training and clinical training. And I think we need more of it. We need more of it. I mean, I was in that group where what we learned on the Ontario curriculum was how to make mini pizzas in food economics, grade 7 and grade 8. And that's great, but not an everyday food, right? So I think we need to build those skills right from when kids are young and getting kids, even if they're chopping vegetables or we're helping to prepare meals in the kitchen. And it's hard. We have busy lifestyles. And the last thing you want to do is put more pressure on families. There's enough pressure and guilt and all that. So I think the more we can incorporate it throughout our life as a skill we can pick up, the better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And thank you, everyone, for all of your questions. To those of you who are joining us online, thank you for your questions. A huge thank you to our speakers today for sharing your cutting research. Yes. And insight. I think we can all agree that we are so much more fortunate for having been here today to have picked up all of this information that we can then take to our own lives. Also, a wonderful thank you once again to Dr. Donna Wood, your family, Mrs. Southern, and the Wood Joint Research Fund for enabling us to continue these truly valuable public events. And this event is also supported by the Alumni All Access Partnership Fund, and you can visit them at their booth in the lobby. And if you would like to learn more content, learn more about the McCaig Institute, stay in touch on social media. You can find them on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and you'll receive as well an online survey in the next few days about this event, and we would love your feedback. That allows us to make these events that much better. Also, if you haven't already, I invite you to visit our community partners at their information booths on either side of the lobby. There they are. And that concludes the formal part of our Wood Forum 2023 program. Thank you again as well to Maven Media for your support of this. It was wonderful to work with you. And also, Science in the Cinema, there it is. Now you're thinking, what is this? Well, as you can see, November 22nd at the Plaza Theater, they're going to be screening Big Hero 6. It's called Science in the Cinema. And this is a free, all-ages event, and it will feature a discussion with our researchers post-film exploring new medical technologies for improved healthcare delivery. Plus, and is it on there? Oh, I think it might be. Plus, they'll delve into the transformative role of artificial intelligence and machine learning in remote healthcare. So this is going to be very interesting. So November 22, 6 p.m., the Plaza Theater, that is down in Kensington. And last but not least, thank you again, and you online, for coming today. Please do mark your calendars and join us next fall for Wood Forum 2024. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you.